Welcome back, horror fans, cinephiles, and giallo enthusiasts. This is Tanner Leeser, your host for all things giallo, here on The King in Giallo. Our next stop on our journey through giallo cinema is the third giallo film from Umberto Lenzi, A Quiet Place to Kill, released in 1970. In this video, I will do a deep dive overview and then segue into a full review and GialliTally. The overview will be spoiler-free, the review and GialliTally will not. Here is A Quiet Place to Kill overview. A Quiet Place to Kill, sometimes called Paranoia, is an Italian, French, and Spanish co-production. The film is directed by Umberto Lenzi, written by Marcello Coscia, Rafael Romero Marchand, Bruno Di Geronimo, and Marie-Claire Solaville, and the music is by Gregorio Garcia Segura. The players involved are Carroll Baker as Helen, Jean Sorel as Maurice Sauvage, Annaproclemer as Constance Sauvage, Marina Kofa as Susan Sauvage, Alberto Dalbes as Dr. Harry Webb, and Louis Davila as Albert Duchamp, or Jaime Duchamp in our English version. The plot follows Helen, a down-on-her-luck race car driver, who after suffering an accident, is offered by her ex-husband, Maurice, to stay at his villa and recuperate. Helen has her suspicions of Maurice, assuming he wants to reconcile, but she takes the offer. Upon arrival, she discovers that Maurice has remarried and his new wife, Constance, is the one who actually invited Helen to stay. The two form a close bond, allowing Constance to confide to Helen that she hates Maurice, and she wants for the two of them to get rid of him together. The plot very much thickens as the plan is put into action. Round 3 of Umberto Lenzi and Carroll Baker. For some viewers, though, the duo and their intrigue might be wearing thin. This plot is another one which borrows a bit from Les Diaboliques, but doesn't have the distinction of having Ernesto Gastaldi as its screenwriter, and quite honestly, Lenzi ought to move on from this type of plot entirely. To the film's credit, there is a very effective twist in the plot, which I suspect most people don't see coming. The film does unfortunately pile on a few too many absurd, contrived, and incongruous plot threads and attempts to weave them into something. For example, Helen in her past was a very pampered housewife without much skills to earn a living on her own, but after separating from her abusive husband, she is forced into working in order to keep a roof above her head. What does she do? Race car driving. There's no setup for this, which there could have been, but the more logical solution would be to just have given her a different, more believable job to begin with. It just comes off as the filmmakers thinking that race car driving would be a very neat thing to film and to put on screen, which I guess they're vaguely correct about. The film also unfortunately works overtime to make its main characters as thoroughly unlikable as possible. This trope is typically done better in Bava's gialli, where people are getting knocked off readily like it's a slasher, but here we are forced to sit and simmer with these personalities. The viewing experience makes for an environment where we are less concerned about what happens to our protagonists in the long run. Being the third giallo in a row, the formula for Lenzi is beginning to show signs of fatigue and possibly apathy from himself. To his credit, his next giallo with Baker, Knife of Ice, 1972, will at least take a risk and do something completely different. A Quiet Place to Kill does, however, come off as a repeat of its predecessor films. I'll mention that I recall enjoying this film more than So Sweet, So Perverse, 1969, and Knife of Ice. And though I may like this more than Orgasmo, 1968, I can admit that it is not quite on the same level as that movie. The cast earns their paychecks, not for breaking new ground or going against the mold, but for bringing life to one-dimensional cutouts of characters, which is very difficult to do if you're not in a campy genre flick. Jean Sorel returns to embody a playboy role he's already done numerous times. He could be sleepwalking and nobody would complain. Carroll Baker forces us to suspend our disbelief as we watch her early on engage in circuit racing, which thankfully we don't have to do for long, but as the film revs up its main plot, Baker is placed into a very typical role where she becomes a pawn in the plot, and by this point I think we are mostly all fed up with this arrangement. Marina Kofa plays Maurice's stepdaughter in the later part of the film, and she breathes the most fresh air into the film, both in performance and in character. Marina was born in 1951. She only was in the film industry for a short while before hanging up her coat and walking away. After this, she would appear in The Last Rebel, 1971, remembered as one of the failed attempts of Joe Namath, an ex-football player, to break out as a movie star. A Quiet Place to Kill would remain as the biggest and most popular role for Kofa, who would later pass away at the age of 59 in 2011. For Lenzi, perhaps this film had taught him that he would have to adapt his approach to the genre if he was to continue making giallo films. He would make several more, including An Ideal Place to Kill, aka Oasis of Fear, 1971, the aforementioned Knife of Ice, 1972, Seven Blood-Stained Orchids, 1972, Spasmo, 1974, and Eyeball, 1975. But Lenzi's giallo films seem to have peaked in the late 60s when he was one of the trendsetters, and into the 70s, his name would begin to carry more weight and appeal within the poliziesque genre of Italian cinema, thanks to films such as Almost Human, 1974, and Violent Naples, 1976. But I digress. On to the review. Spoilers ahead for those of you who haven't yet seen the film. You've been warned. My prediction for the movie's GialliTally score. At the time of writing this, I have seen this film once, and it was over a year ago. I know Lenzi does not disappoint with his adherence to the cliches, so this will be the first prediction that I don't lowball my guess. I will say 450 to 500 points for the film's GialliTally score. Well, let's begin the GialliTally and review portion of the video. Beginning as always with the pre-viewing cliches. The repeat offenders are 1 point for actor, 3 for writer, 3 for composer, and 5 for director. Carroll Baker was in So Sweet, So Perverse, Orgasmo, and The Sweet Body of Deborah, 3 points. Jean Sorel was in Perversion Story and The Sweet Body of Deborah, 2 points. Alberto Dalbes was in Assassination in Rome, 1 point. Umberto Lenzi co-wrote Orgasmo, 3 points. Marcello Coscia co-wrote A Game of Crime, 3 points. Marie-Claire Solaville co-wrote Orgasmo, 3 points. And Umberto Lenzi directed So Sweet, So Perverse and Orgasmo, 10 points. Cliché points for the title. A Quiet Place to Kill. Contains the word kill, 5 points. First look, we have 25 points for the Italian director, and an additional 15 points for the movie releasing during the golden age of giallo cinema. And would you look at that, it is plot o'clock. The film opens with some bizarre clips in negative for its opening title sequence. All these sequences will be seen within the film, so I'm going to gloss over them and not count any cliches for anything I might observe in these opening minutes. It finally ends, and we transition to, I don't know, regular vision? This is Helen, Carroll Baker's character. She likes to go fast. I know it's standard precaution, but it's humorous to me that the emergency personnel are on standby, as if she's crashed into the wall before. Z is for zoom. 5 points. Let's add up first-person POV for the Steadicam shot, 5 points. And circuit racing, or reckless driving. This movie has a lot of reckless driving, believe that. 5 points. E is for eyeballs, 5 points. Add extra points for Z is for zoom, for a zoom on eyes, another 5 points. I don't claim to know jack shit about racing or the fundamentals, but she doesn't appear to be doing great, and this is all just solo speedruns. After completing a lap, Helen sees a flashback of Jean Sorel. He is her husband, who, as we will see soon enough, was manipulative and abusive. She sees him a couple more times, then loses control and crashes the car. She is rescued and brought to the hospital. R is for reporter, 5 points. She is rushed into surgery. Is a scalpel a knife? Cause this would be 15 points for a total for a knife, bloodied, and a zoom on it. My gut says no. We'll hold off on that one. G is for gloves, 5 points. Helen is post-op now, and she looks exactly the same, but the movie seems to suggest that she doesn't. As Helen is leaving the hospital, recovered, the doctor hands her a bottle of sedatives. He says, no emotional stressors either. Don't think about racing. She says yes, yes, no smoking, no lovemaking, and no alcohol. The doctor allows her one of those things, and she chooses alcohol. Who could have guessed? He says, okay, just never on an empty stomach. This all might be important later. This man here picks her up. He says her account is overdrawn, the car is totaled, and the manufacturer wants $12,000. Exposition dumping, 2 points. A nurse hands Helen a telegram, which she passes along, assuming it's related to medical bills. The message is an invitation to come and stay at the villa of the sender. Who is the sender? Maurice. She confesses that he is her ex-husband, who left her 3 years ago, and that she hasn't seen him since. While driving, she says how cigarettes are verboten, as is lovemaking. Not sure who this guy is exactly, if he's a lover or chauffeur or what. They take a, quote, whiskey stop, and while the man is out of the car, Helen hops into the driver's seat and leaves his ass behind. Foreign locales, Mallorca, Spain, 5 points. Urban locales, 2 points. She smokes a cig. Oh, no, she doesn't. She inquires to the locals where she might find the home of Maurice, and I'll let this cheap writing here speak for itself.
An operator?
Yes.
Most unbelievably sexy.
Well, yes.
That villa.
She parks outside and goes in. Art featured, 5 points. Watch this.
Maurice.
This goof is so obvious that I thought at first that it was meant to be seen by the audience because it was supposed to be Maurice trying to surprise Helen. But no, it's just sloppily left in the final cut of the film. A woman walks in and greets Helen, to Helen's dismay. This is Constance. She is Maurice's new wife. Constance says they married 6 months after Helen and Maurice separated. Ouch. F is for fashion, 5 points. I'm gonna say, throughout this movie, Jean Sorel has an amazing wardrobe, except for one where he looks like a picnic table. They go out to surprise Maurice, and there's babyface Jean Sorel himself. We get a second flashback showing Helen having pulled a gun on Maurice and him backslapping her. Typical 1970s Italian misogyny, woman is slapped, 5 points. The two seem to hit it off like old times. The three then go out that night. The man with the camera here is Dr. Harry Webb, and filming things is basically the bulk of his characterization. We meet some other no-names. This man in the Italian cut is Albert, but in the English cut is Jaime. He offers whiskey and...
Oh, just a moment. I never drink on an empty stomach.
Sedatives taken, and extra points for being with alcohol, 10 points. We get more terribly corny dialogue.
Why, of course, with all Maurice's women, a little confusion is easy.
One might get jealous and kill you.
One of them tried, but didn't succeed.
I'll bet it was you.
Oh, a fortune teller. Where's your turban?
X is for xenophobia. I'll spoil this right now. Extra points for the main character being a foreigner. She is American, as we will learn in a few moments. 10 points. So, Maurice is known by everyone to be a playboy. Constance insists on Helen staying so that the two of them can become friends, which makes Maurice suspicious. N is for nudity, 5 points. As Helen showers, Maurice spies on her, which doesn't go unnoticed by his wife. V is for voyeur, 5 points. Maurice meets Helen in her room. He tests the waters with Helen, who claims that she's not interested in him anymore. He asks what she thinks about Constance, prompting Helen to assume that she must be very rich, which Maurice acknowledges as truth. Maurice assuages Helen's suspicions of him by stating that he didn't invite her here, his wife did. To add to this, new clothes are brought in for Helen from Constance. That night, the three are having dinner out back. I see a certain green bottle floating in the background. There's this awkward bit where Helen says thanks for the clothes and that they fit perfectly, and Constance says that Maurice remembered Helen's size, and he says, how can you forget such perfection? Then he rubs her leg under the table, and then Constance does the same thing. The houseboy has seen enough. We get more awkwardly bad lines. Have a listen.
Sometimes, Maurice, I wonder what your aim in life is.
To make myself happy, darling, and to put your money to good use.
Was he this cynical with you too, Helen?
I never noticed. The important thing was he made love well.
Well enough to overcome my wife's frigidity, right?
Long story short, he's a scumbag. He doesn't hide it, and they all know it. A phone call is for Constance. Her daughter is on the line. J is for J and B, extra for it being drunk. 10 points. Maurice says that Constance's daughter is from a previous marriage in which she inherited 50 oil wells from. We overhear Constance's conversation as she demands her daughter to break things off with a man who she forbids her from seeing, and that her daughter's arrangement with this man is wicked. T is for telephone, 5 points. Helen asks if Constance always signs her telegrams with Maurice's name, and he says, why not? He signs all her checks with her name. He begins putting the moves on Helen, hardcore. I is for infidelity, 5 points. Constance gets off the phone and apologizes, saying her daughter, Susan, always angers her, and then her and Maurice have a few back and forths about how he is the last person qualified to speak on the morality of young women. The next day, Helen is out when she comes across Constance. Constance points out that Helen must be curious why she was invited here in the first place. She goes on to give Helen money to pay off the $12,000 to the manufacturer. Constance begins explaining herself. She says that 3 years ago, Maurice left Helen penniless, which forced Helen to do a few jobs before she settled on racing, which, okay, doesn't make sense, but go on. They agree that they both married the same corrupt man who manipulates them. Helen begins to back away from whatever Constance might be building towards. Maurice asks, what's up with Helen? That night, Helen gets out of bed, takes another pill with alcohol, and she looks out over the sea. She has another flashback of herself with Maurice. Helen suddenly overhears something and investigates. Jaime and Constance are dragging an unconscious Maurice to bed, but something seems to be the matter. Constance tells Helen that Maurice fainted. Jaime sends Constance to get adrenaline, then he leaves to call for help. While alone, Helen gives Maurice CPR. On her way back into the room, Constance intentionally drops the glass syringe and the vial onto the ground, then says it fell by accident. Helen says it's unnecessary now as Maurice is coming to. The next day, Helen is questioning Constance about the adrenaline accidentally dropping. Q is for questions, 5 points. Constance admits that she cannot take Maurice anymore and that she knows that he will be leaving her once he finds the perfect replacement. Helen understands completely and agrees. Constance then offers $100,000 to Helen to help her get rid of Maurice. Constance says that she will stay with her daughter and will give Helen until her return to make a decision. The next day, Helen gets her things together to leave. Maurice tries to get her to stay, but she claims that she has a rally race in Barcelona. Helen goes to leave, but her car craps out on her. Faulty car, 2 points. Maurice says it must be a missing part, and she'll have to stay over the weekend now because the garages will all be closed until Monday. He offers that the two of them can stay together, like old times, but Helen declines him. Maurice reveals that he has the missing part. I ought to have added this earlier. Set in a manor or chateau, 5 points. Animals featured, carrier pigeon, 2 points. Helen pulls a message out of the bird's ass, it seems, an invitation to come down and eat with Maurice. They are about to take a drive to get lunch when Helen somehow knows where Maurice is hiding the missing part. Why did he put it in his suit jacket? She takes it and walks to her car. Cut to them racing along down the road, driving on a winding road on a mountain setting. 2 points. This may seem like an odd cliche I have added, but believe me, it comes up quite a bit in all these movies. As Helen tempts fate, she jokingly remarks that Maurice shouldn't worry about her because he's in the death seat. Here's another goof where you can see the shadow of the camera. Helen brakes just before plummeting off the edge. Maurice gets out, looking like he's searching for someone to sue. Helen says,
Trick I learned as a child.
And that is the only information we have that maybe she did have some prior experience which served her in being a racer. We cut to the clubbing scene from Orgasmo. Both movies share the alternate title of Paranoia. It's only fitting they share the same song. Gratuitous 1970s dancing, 2 points. Later in the night, the two are slow dancing as Maurice attempts to extend an olive branch to Helen and make amends for his past behavior. They smooch, and we cut to them in bed in one of the strangest of locations. As the two have some post-coitus talk, the conversation shifts to how capable of violence a woman in love is. The imagery is made complete with this terrifying miscreant of taxidermy. When Helen tells Maurice that he hasn't changed, he tells her point blank that he is not leaving Constance for her because the two of them would be penniless. However, Constance's money could support the two of them, or all three even if he commands her so. Cut to Constance watching the two of them as they pull into the driveway. Helen is visibly upset with Maurice.
Let me go!
Y is for yelling. Extra points for it being a hysterical woman, 10 points. Granted, Helen is completely justified. She's not just being hysterical. She'll be hysterical later on, though. Constance prepares the check she intends to bribe Helen with. Helen admits right away that she and Maurice had made love. Constance, believing the two women are on the same page, hands her the check. Helen tears the check in half, stating she can't live without Maurice, but also that she can't have him. Finally, she asks when the murder is to occur. I guess she's doing this for free. We find all the friends at a little outing by the pool. The two women contemplate the sports Maurice plays in order to orchestrate a murder to appear as an accident. Golf won't work. Riding, they'd have to cut the horse in on the action. Underwater fishing is promising so long as they can find out how to make it look like an accident. The conversation between the two women doesn't go unnoticed. They discuss sabotaging the spear gun, which uses compressed air, but are not sure if that is strong enough. Maurice interrupts them.
Not powerful enough? Very powerful. You're referring to me?
Helen flirts with Jaime, expressing that she'd love to go out on a boat, making Maurice jealous, who immediately states that if she wants to go out on a boat, he's got one, she need not bother Jaime. The two then plan with Constance to take the boat out tomorrow. That night we watch as Helen shoots the spear gun, piercing Maurice, but it is all a daydream. I'm going to be very generous with this. H is for hallucinations, 5 points. I am specific not to include flashbacks, falsely remembered memories, or visions, meaning of the future, as these have all separate tallies in my system. But this instance here is both not a precognition vision, but is very vivid that she has a strong physical reaction. I might be bending my own rule here a bit. He questions her what the hell she is doing at this hour and with the spear gun. Target practice, she says. He takes the rifle from her, saying you'd need one big fish for this. Dude, she has not been very shy in the slightest about her intentions, and he just plays it all off as if she'd never go through with it, as if she hasn't tried before. She says it is a present for him, not because she forgives him, but because she doesn't care anymore. The next day, the three are out on the boat. Maurice says he is going down now and asks them to keep the boat steady. Helen grabs the gun and aims it point blank at Maurice, but she hesitates. Constance orders her to shoot him, but she simply can't. The two wrestle over the gun, giving Maurice enough time to draw a knife and stab his wife. K is for knives. Extra point for the blade getting bloodied. 10 points. Constance falls dead after 3 thrusts of the blade. Their friends are pulling up behind them in their own boat. Maurice and Helen act fast to bind Constance's body. The 3 of them wave at their friends, thanks to Helen holding Constance's limp arm up. Extra points for Z is for zoom, for a zoom on a dead body. Another 5 points. I'll also give W is for witness, 5 points. They may not know it, but they are witnessing a murder. Maurice plunges his plan into action and initiates a fierce maneuver with the boat, which sends everybody sprawling into the sea. With the boat capsized and the whole party in the water, Maurice and Helen behave as if they're helpless as they tread the waves and call out for help, and for Constance. Evidence seen being hidden may include a body, 5 points. Helen is hysterical now, just saying. The two get rescued. Let's add L is for lies, 5 points. Add extra points for I is for infidelity for murder occurring after the fact, another 5 points. At port now, the two groups are being questioned by a detective. Maurice and Helen are forced to lie to justify the actions that led to them all being thrown from the boat. I wanted to add A's for alibi, but I had to double check, and indeed an alibi by definition is only used when one is supplying a location of being elsewhere during a crime. It might come up later. The other party vouches for Helen and Maurice, having seen the whole thing. Add points for Z is for zoom for a zoom on a knife, another 5 points. As Helen is distracting the investigators with her explanation of the events, Maurice kicks the knife into the harbor. The official report is finished. Solange here sobs over having just seen Constance wave to them before the tragedy struck. The witnesses all sign the report, but the judge asserts they cannot close the matter until they can find the body. Helen has a flashback to them tying up Constance. Maurice agrees with a search for the body, but offers that they should look to the west because the currents would certainly have moved the body into the open sea, but the harbor master, I'm guessing that's who this is, refutes this supposition, saying the currents actually travel northwest. Everybody leaves, and once alone, Maurice searches for Helen. He finds her in a state of hysterics and slaps her. She says she's already tried to kill him 3 years ago. Nothing has changed, but Maurice argues that yes, things have changed because now they have money. He begins putting the moves on her, necking 5 points. The two basically are about to make love. We cut to either the next day or several days later. This young woman arrives in the driveway. She looks about the house, calling out to her mother. This is Susan, Constance's daughter. Maurice and Helen are naked in bed, and the two scramble to make things not appear as bad as they obviously are. Helen goes to the door, and Susan asks if she's a house guest of her mother's. Helen says yes. Susan asks where her mother is, where Maurice is, if anything is the matter. Helen clearly sucks at lying and says Maurice will explain everything. Susan remarks how something strange is going on to Miguel, the butler. Miguel takes on the responsibility of relaying the tragic news to Susan. Maurice explains to Susan what happened, then comes in to tell Helen. He reminds her to get her shit together in front of Miguel, then remarks that he got her this lighter as a gift. Susan comes inside, and she and Miguel share a look. Later, poolside, Miguel walks in to say goodbye as he is going on holiday and will be back in a month. Susan immediately puts on her constable cap and interrogates the two of them. She asserts that her mother was likely a much better swimmer than Helen and asks them why they feel it is necessary to hide the fact that they are still in love. Helen says it's not Susan's place, but she disagrees, saying it is, since her mother is now dead and Helen has taken her place. Maurice tells Susan that she is being rude. Helen is getting her drink on. Maurice tells her that that would be a bad idea, but Helen is anxious, stating that Susan is suspicious of them. Maurice plans to settle the estate, then send Susan back to school. Jaime arrives and tells them that the search efforts have been unsuccessful. He apologizes, saying they ought to close the search. Maurice agrees, saying that the currents could have taken her anywhere, but Susan says that maybe the body stayed right there, right where the accident had occurred. Jaime agrees, but states that they already looked. Maurice, shaking suspicion, asks Jaime to keep searching there. Jaime says he will oversee the divers personally. Susan adds that she'll go along too. The next day, the search is underway. Helen and Maurice watch from the tower. Susan tosses flowers into the sea. This man here, with the mouthful of rotting teeth, warns those in the boat to not come any closer, saying that he and his team of fishermen are pulling up their nets and the boat could get caught if it wanders too closely. He says the net is snagged on something. Everybody watches in anticipation as the net is drawn in. The fishermen pull up the most suspicious-looking log in existence. Susan pleads that they stop searching. She just couldn't bear to see what her mother's remains would look like now. The judge obliges, saying as of now, the matter is closed. Maurice and Helen walk inside the tower, Helen expressing that she can't take this anymore and must leave. Maurice argues that she can't or she'll cast more suspicion onto them. He says he is with her, then undresses her, and the two are getting hot and heavy. That night, the two hear someone pull up in a car. They take a look. It is Jacques. He says he was sent by Dr. Harry Webb to look for his film camera he had left up here the day of the tragedy. He had been filming them when the accident happened. The friends are at a shooting range. Add the points for animals killed to make the max of 5, so 3 points. Maurice begins questioning Harry about his filming, asking if he caught the accident for certain. Harry believes so, but he left the equipment immediately to attend to his grieving wife, Solange. Harry didn't think to show the footage to Maurice because he didn't want to bring back his suffering. The film is being developed in London at the moment. We then get this corny bit where Susan is going to show off her shooting skills to the group, but refuses to pull the trigger because she feels like a murderer. Harry and Jaime encourage her, saying it is healthy for humans to indulge in some killing, because it satiates our desire to kill other people. Susan ups the ante of the terribly contrived and corny dialogue by telling everyone that she's thought up a plot for a murder story, then brashly just reiterates the events that have already happened, saying how the story is two former lovers who get back together and kill the second wife and make it look like an accident, which prompts the judge here to add that the characters all have a friend who is a judge, who then investigates the killing and sends the two to prison, closing that her plot is too easy to predict. The writers probably have a surprise for us, or else they wouldn't point out the obvious elements in their own story. Jaime pushes Susan to shoot, and she does. Maurice asks Harry when the film will be finished. He says in a few days. Helen arrives at the post office inquiring about a package for Dr. Webb, but Susan is there, saying it hasn't arrived yet. After Helen leaves, Susan tells the postal worker to airmail the package. We have a brief scene where the men are playing golf and Helen goes by, signaling to Maurice that she was unsuccessful in retrieving the package. When asked why Helen dropped by only to leave, Maurice says, "Oh, you know how women are. She's just jealous and making sure that I'm not with another woman." If you're watching this video, you obviously are fine with spoilers. Well, this line is surely prophetic.
3 queens.
Helen walks through the house and stops in her tracks at the sight of who she believes to be Constance standing before her, only Susan. Susan says she only came in here looking for a drink. She antagonizes Helen a little before offering her a drink, saying she could use it. Helen slaps the glass out of Susan's hand and storms out. Susan follows after her, asking why Helen is so disturbed by anything reminding her of Constance. Helen runs to Maurice, who's dressed as a picnic table. Susan tells him that Helen is afraid of ghosts, triggering Maurice to step in and order Susan to stop her behavior. He orders her to her room. Helen is back at the post office where she signs for the tape, which has finally arrived. She hands it to Maurice, who tells her that there's no negative, it is reversible film. Maurice takes the film into another room to inspect it. When he returns, he says that he can't tell if the murder is on the film, that they'll have to check at home on the projector. But outside, they run into Harry and are more or less forced to hand the tape over, saying that they were trying to do him a favor by picking it up. Harry offers to screen it for them. Maurice agrees to it in a few hours. When Helen asks Maurice what the two of them will do now, he assuages her fears, saying if there is anything on there, no one will see it. When setting up the projector, Maurice asks Harry who he told about that he was coming over. Harry says no one and begins the screening. Suddenly, Susan and Jaime walk in. Susan insists on watching it. The footage is mostly mundane, and if anything, shows that Maurice and Constance were happily in love. The footage shifts to the day of the murder. We see the boat with our 3 leads, then the other boat with Jaime and Solange. Just as the footage shows the moment of Helen holding up Constance's limp arm, she screams. That is the end of the footage. Maurice intervenes and tells her to be quiet and to go to her room. I'll say 1970s Italian misogyny, woman is told to shut up, 2 points. He actually does say it later, so it's fine. Odd clue, 5 points. Helen exits, apologizing to everyone present. Harry says that that was the entire film anyways. Alone with the footage, Maurice replays the moment of conviction over and over. He cuts the end of the tape off, then receives a call. As Helen looks for Maurice outside the room, Harry asks if there might be any more footage, but Maurice says perhaps he needs to ask the development lab if there was a missing piece. As they talk, Maurice burns the film he had cut off. Close up on a door handle as someone tries to enter a room, 5 points. He unlocks the door. Susan walks in. Maurice confronts her, asking what she wants. She says she was looking for him, and then puts the smooches on Maurice. Susan, you see, is Maurice's 3rd queen, if that wasn't clear enough. Helen wakes up in the middle of a stormy night. The phone rings and she goes to answer it, but in the mirror, she sees Maurice naked with Susan. Mirror being used beyond its natural purpose, 2 points. Maurice goes after Helen, saying he can explain, but Helen understands everything. She claims that the two of them must have been up to this for a long time, and that's why Constance was mad at her daughter on the phone. Maurice was the man which Constance forbade Susan from seeing anymore, and this is the reason why Constance wanted him dead. Through the door, Susan can overhear Maurice saying that he didn't want to make love to her, that she threw herself at him, and he only did it so she wouldn't talk. He says Helen cannot leave or Susan will know they're hiding something, and that's why he had to sleep with her just now, so she'd be convinced that there was nothing between them.
What? Am I holding a crock of shit?
After another pill and more alcohol, you know, the Baker Lenzi special as it is called at some bars, Maurice convinces Helen to stay and to go back to sleep. He says they'll send Susan back to school and Helen to the tower. Cut to the most cliched giallo trope I don't tally. Two people playing chess as a form of symbolism. Jaime and Maurice are talking about Helen and her state of health. After telling Jaime his plan to help Helen, Maurice moves his pawn and wrongfully declares that he has Jaime's queen. But anybody can see that there are actually several moves Jaime can take. But I actually think this is great symbolism, as it conveys that Maurice believes he has Jaime on the ropes, but he is terribly mistaken. Let's keep watching. Helen awakens and catches a glimpse of Maurice as he's heading out. Maurice arrives at the tower, and within moments, Helen's car pulls up. Maurice grabs one of the many rifles and loads it. Cut to Jaime driving up to the tower for the meeting that he agreed to oversee when he hears gunshots. He speeds up, but is too late. He watches as a woman who appears to be Helen leaves. Inside, he finds the tower in a mild state of disarray. Upon going outside, he finds blood on the floor, then looks to the waves. Helen gets dressed and goes to leave, but Jaime cuts her off, accusingly asking her where she thinks she's going. He asks her where Maurice is. She says she doesn't know, but suspects the tower. Jaime orders her out of the car. Inside, Jaime questions Helen, asking her about the scheduled meeting, but Helen says she didn't plan on going and was leaving. He asks why she'd leave without saying goodbye to anyone. She accuses him of cross-examining her, and he orders her to stop playing innocent, that he knows that she killed Maurice. This news shocks Helen and Susan, who walks in. Susan tells Jaime that Helen is jealous of her, that she and Maurice had a quarrel last night, then confesses it was because of her, because Helen had found Susan and Maurice making it, you see. Jaime claims he saw Helen leaving the site of the tower, but she denies this. Then when he asks Susan, she behaves obstinately, then claims that she looked for Helen earlier and couldn't find her. Helen says this is false, but cannot tell Jaime why Susan would be making it up, referring to the fact that she and Maurice killed Constance. Helen looks for her lighter, which Jaime conveniently procures, stating he had found it at the tower, evidence that she was there. He then tells her how he believes she killed him and asks whether he had fallen into the sea naturally or if she pushed him, but Helen continues to deny it all. Two officers enter and say they've checked the tower, then Jaime gives them the order to check the waters off the shore of the tower. They leave, and Jaime tells Helen that later she will accompany him to the tower and she will tell him exactly what happened. Helen is now unraveling a bit. She drinks more, and when she turns, she sees Susan in the mirror, but she looks like Helen. And when she turns back, it really is Susan in disguise. U is for undercover, 5 points. Susan mocks Helen for being so gullible. She confesses to dressing as Helen, driving to the tower, shooting Maurice, and setting up the frame job against Helen, pinning the motive to her as jealousy. Helen asks why. Susan further confesses that Maurice took her virginity at age 14, then he married her mother. But then Maurice started sleeping with Helen again, the woman who murdered her mother. She says that since they are in Spain, Helen will be executed for her crimes. As Helen runs out, Susan quips that she'll send Helen a postcard to her jail cell. Helen tries to escape the estate, but is blocked by an officer one way. She tries another way, but is also blocked. The phone rings. Susan answers it, then fetches one of the officers outside, saying the phone is for him. Helen sees this and takes the chance to escape the house. The officer takes the phone, but no one is there, it seems. He notices Helen making a break and goes to intercept her. Susan tells the mystery person on the line that Helen just left. Just that moment, the judge arrives and is briefed on Helen's escape. Susan then summons him for the phone. The mystery person is Maurice. Add 5 points for T is for telephone for the killer making a call. 5 more points. Maurice says that he is calling from the doctors because he hurt himself while cleaning his gun. He expresses confusion to Jaime regarding Helen's whereabouts. Jaime tells Maurice how he thought that Helen had just murdered him and that he saw her leaving the crime scene, which causes Maurice to shout that he had warned Jaime that Helen was mad and they must find her. He asks the doctor if he can borrow his car, and the doctor obliges him. Helen is now racing down the mountainous road at breakneck speed. She has 4 flashbacks. As she continues down the hill, she has 3 more flashbacks. When she nears the precariously sharp turn, she sees Maurice standing in the road, which forces Helen to crash off the side of the cliff. Maurice gets back in the car and leaves. Jaime, Susan, and the officers arrive on scene to find the car in flames. Right on cue, Maurice pulls up. Susan threatens Jaime by saying she will be assisting the Spanish police against him for causing this fatal accident, but Maurice rejects this, stating that he was just doing his job. Jaime tells the officer that the matter is closed. Alone in the car, Maurice tells Susan that their plan worked. The two of them were conspiring this whole time. Jaime will believe it was his fault, and they remark that Helen had to go or else she would blackmail Maurice, but Susan states that she'd have had to kill Maurice if they didn't get rid of Helen, because she wants him all to herself. Suddenly, the officers are alerted by 3 men in a boat, the ones tasked with finding Maurice's body. Jaime tries to call them off of their search, but they assert that they've found the body. They found a woman's body. Terror grips both Susan and Maurice. The men lie the corpse on the beach, and immediately it is evident that she was stabbed and that she was bound and tossed into the sea. The movie ends here with the downfall of Maurice a certainty. I'm going to quickly add up some final tallies, but keep in mind that I consider Maurice, Helen, and Susan all killers, as conspirators are killers in my book. S is for secrets. Extra points for the killer having an impossible to predict motive. 10 points. I'm referring to Maurice and Susan being secret conspirators. A is for alibi. Extra points for the alibi getting investigated. 10 points. And extra points for L is for lies, for the killer lying about an alibi. Another 5 points. Someone else is believed to be the killer or mistaken identity. 5 points. O is for obsession. Extra points for the killer being obsessed. Helen and Susan being the obsessed ones. 10 points. The killer dies accidentally. Extra points for falling. 10 points. Someone dies by falling to their death. 15 points. The killer is killed by someone. 10 points. A murder is faked as a vehicular accident. Extra if someone faked their death or a car blows up while falling over a cliff. 10 points. Betrayal by the killer or the accomplice is killed. 5 points. And the killer is painfully or hilariously punished in their own death scene. 12 points. And that's A Quiet Place to Kill. Some may not like this Lenzi one very much, but I think it is freaking awesome. I think I can actually say that despite recognizing Orgasmo as the better film, I prefer A Quiet Place to Kill. The style isn't as well utilized for sure, the dialogue can be forced and a bit stupid at times, and the acting isn't quite on the same level, but I think the plot is way more engaging and the twists and turns are well earned and well executed. Lenzi always cracks me up the way he kills off Carroll Baker's characters. I do think this is a solid entry into the canon of giallo. Sure, it's probably not for everybody, but I adore this so much more than the same plots we've been getting from the late 60s and early 70s. I'd rather see conspirators try to weasel their way out of getting caught more than someone being gaslit into going crazy any day. So for me, this is my favorite Lenzi Baker giallo. Only time will tell if this is my favorite Lenzi giallo overall. Let's segue to the GialliTally cliches for this movie. Post-giallo viewing cliches. The reason for the killing. I'm going to say Maurice and Susan are both conspiring because they're hoping to end up together, which I count as gain, and by proxy, they will be inheriting the fortune from Constance, which is greed, so greed and gain, 5 points. The reason for the investigation, police investigator, 2 points. Bonus points, the style bonus. Lenzi's early giallo films are very stylish, and some do it better than others. This one is not one of the better ones in terms of the style and how it uses it, but regardless, the movie is filled with an abundance of zooms and crash zooms, some focus rack fades, driving POVs, the spinning shot. The opening credit is in negative, and we have another psychedelic dance scene. I'll say, all in all, out of a max total of 25 points, I will give A Quiet Place to Kill 18 points for its style bonus. Soundtrack.
You represent all the things I dislike in a man.
Indeed, 15 points. Bad effects. You know, technically this is a fake body flying out of the crashing car, but damn it, it is the most convincing fake body in any giallo I've ever seen. Kudos to that, but it is a fake body nonetheless, so yes. For bad effects, I can give between 10 and 15 points, and since this is an amazingly executed fake effect, I'll say 10 points. I feel like the full points go to the ones which are very obviously and laughably bad. Final look, extra points. The Deadpool, tallying how many kills and deaths are featured in the film. I break it down as thus: 10 points per kill or death scene for the main Deadpool, plus any stylistic kill multipliers, which we didn't add yet, plus the knife kill bonus. We have Constance, stabbed with a knife. Medically, this is impaling, so 10 plus 5 plus 6, 21 points. And Helen, vehicular, 10 plus 9, 19 points. Extended Deadpool for those other deaths mentioned but not seen, I'll give 3 points for each. None. Red herrings for the total number of legitimate suspects in the film. 5 points per legit suspect are awarded. I am going to be generous by my standards, because the Susan reveal to me is surprising, but I guess there are people who were not surprised by it, so... Constance, 5 points. Helen, 5 points. Maurice, 5 points. And Susan, 5 points. Flashback sequences, 5 points each. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. And then we see 3 more flashbacks in this sequence seconds later, but 2 of them are from the same instance, so I will only count the one which is not a duplicate. 9. For a total of 45 points for flashbacks. Nudity, I award 5 points for ass, 7 for breasts, and 10 for genitalia. We have Helen, breasts and ass, 12 points. Helen again, breasts and ass, 12 points. Helen again, breasts and ass, 12 points. And Helen once more, breasts, 7 points. Ladies and gentlemen, for A Quiet Place to Kill, I awarded the film an AZ score of 21 out of 26. With the bonus points for these, we have a modified score total of 165 points. And for the full GialliTally score, I award A Quiet Place to Kill a GialliTally score of 579 points. Compared to Perversion Story with 571 points, A Quiet Place to Kill is the new leader for the GialliTally in first place with 579 points, with The Bird with the Crystal Plumage now in third with 564 points. I predicted that the movie would end up getting around 450 to 500 points, and I thought I was being generous, so damn, I was off. I didn't think it would be the new leader, but as these films go on, their previewing cliche totals will be growing so long as their casts and crews are filled with veterans of giallo cinema. I'm just glad that it got such a high score without having to use gratuitous nudity. But like I've stated before, these points don't mean a movie is better or worse. Please like this video, share it with your friends if they are horror fans or cinephiles, subscribe to The King in Giallo if you haven't yet, and if you have any questions, thoughts, curiosities, or concerns, leave those below in the comment section and I will get back to you. Give The King in Giallo a follow on Instagram and a like on Facebook. Next time on The King in Giallo will be the Forgotten Giallo film series. Episode 16, 1970, Part 3. And then we kick off the Giallo films of 1971. Thank you very much for your continued support. This is Tanner Leeser for The King in Giallo. And if nothing else, I'll see you next time.
Oh, I couldn't help myself. I had to make love with you one more time.
Whore.